Virtually all of Bobby Joe and her husband's money, whatever assets they had, were consumed in this litigation where they tried to undo these cryonics. And I don't know how you undo what the process you just described, where there's actually a sort of decapitation, that the head is preserved separately for reasons I don't understand.
Life's Third Act is a podcast dedicated to helping you get the most out of your retirement. Sponsored by TuckerAllen. Here's attorney CPA Joe Cordell.
Welcome. This is Life's Third Act, and we're continuing the conversation that we left off with. For the introduction of that, go back to the beginning of the previous episode, but I think you'll enjoy this discussion.
Right after his death, he actually died in his home in Florida, and his oldest daughter, Bobby Joe, said that he wanted his ashes, he wanted to be cremated and his ashes spread in the Florida Keys. But his youngest two children said that he wanted his remains to be frozen cryonically. And it's a bit murky on how they got access to the body and who kind of got there first, but eventually his body day after was flown to Arizona, and then there they actually separated his head and his body, and they froze them cryonically, which, if you don't know what that is, it's basically just freezing a body in time. Science says that eventually we'll be able to pull those bodies back out and, attach them however to whatever, and people will be able to live again basically forever. But obviously we don't know if that works. And what had happened in the big dispute with that is that in his will, it said he wanted to be cremated. So his oldest daughter was like, no, we need to stick to this. But his youngest two children had a napkin, and we'll kind of get more into that, basically had a napkin signed by Ted and the both of them saying that they all wanted to be frozen cryonically so that they could all live together in the future. And that is really what got the dispute rolling.
Yeah, it was referred to as a family pact, quote unquote. But it's important to know that the child that opposed this, the daughter, who was the oldest, she was from the first marriage. And I don't know whether she ever had, I suspect she did not have the relationship with the other two children who were from the third marriage, and of course significantly younger. So they wouldn't have grown up together, and they may not have interacted as regularly. That's what it appears from the circumstances, that there were kind of these two camps. And with Bobby Joe was her husband, who also supported her and was very much involved in this. So when he passes away, I think John Henry, the son, is the one who gets access to the body. As you said, the body is flown to Arizona to this Alcor Life Extension Foundation.
Yes.
Some of you have heard of this. It's a well-known company that does this. And
everything you build for you and your family deserves protecting. All of those important assets you have worked so hard to acquire and enjoy, you want to make sure they're handled with care. At TuckerAllen, our attorneys will customize an estate plan that will work for you and your family's goals and needs. TuckerAllen, estate planning, probate, and trust administration. Visit TuckerAllen.com.
And it's of dubious scientific value. There's not a lot of support for this concept. I guess the idea, though, is this, and this is hard to argue with this, is that if you allow yourself to be normally buried, not to mention cremated, then the possibility of your being restored to life at some future point, we can agree, would be pretty close to nil. So the suggestion is, look, if you've done this preservation at far below 0 degrees, I mean, this is like 300 negative degrees Celsius, whatever it is. It's a very, very cold circumstance that's intended to provide preservation under the most ideal circumstances that you could, whatever those are.
Yeah.
And the idea, I think, of its advocates is not that there's this 80% probability that you're going to be restored to life. I don't think there's any scientific support for that notion. But But I do think that you do increase your possibility of preservation. So to the extent that you have a desire to preserve some hope that you will walk this planet again, putting aside religion for a minute, people who don't see any supernatural or eternal life, then for those people, it's they're either alive or they're dust. Mm-hmm. And I can see for those people, they might think, well, I have the money, why not? But just so we're clear to our viewers that cryonics is not something that most scientists say is probable by any means, but it's certainly, your odds are certainly better than if you don't do it. I think maybe that was the thinking, so I understood from comments that were made by the children. But supposedly this conversation came up, and we'll kind of roll into the discussion of the will here. And there was a will, I'm happy to report. We'll roll into this, and we'll kind of incorporate this into the issues, the stew of this subject. So there was originally a will that was made many years earlier, like in the 80s, that provided for a particular distribution. This will was updated in 96. So in 96, you had an updated will. Apparently, that will was not changed later, and there was this incident with the napkin that we've called this family pact. That came along in 2000, I think, or was it 2001?
It was 2000. I believe it was right after he had the pacemaker.
Yeah, so he was in the hospital. Mm-hmm. So we have a will that has made provision in 96. This will is created, properly signed off. I mean, legally it's done correctly. And it had provision for disposal of his body, as you said. It called for him to be cremated and his remains distributed. Now, keep in mind, this is not a subject that has to be included in a will that is properly executed. As we've talked on this show before, wills have to be executed with this meticulous care for it to be held valid. And there's good public policy reasons for that, because the person who's expressing their wishes will not be around to defend themselves. So there's all sorts of potential for mischief and mischaracterization and all that stuff later. So the law has developed a set of very formal rules and phases by which you have to go through if you're going to execute or sign off on a will and have it be valid. So the topics, though, that are subject to that process relate to your assets in this world. A topic that is not reserved for a will exclusively is a provision about how to dispose of your body. There are other ways you can do that. The law is provided for those. You can, for example, empower a person who has a durable power of attorney for health care or a durable power of attorney generally. If you have specifically given them that authority, then you have that as an option. And then most states will allow you to leave some record where this is your intention. The problem is that this is incorporated in a very serious, solemn document. So if there were simply another statement signed on a piece of paper from 96 where he had said, I want this cremation, and it were held up against this napkin, then probably people said, look, let's go with the napkin. But in this case, this is ensconced in this, this formal document in the will. So he comes along, as we said, later after the will's executed without changing the will, without doing a codicil or a new will. He decides to sign this piece of paper in a hospital, which is signed next to his signature is also that of his children. But it's worth mentioning why this created some grounds for suspicion on the part of the oldest child, at least, if not others. And that's that whenever he signed legal documents, including his will, he signed it as Theodore Williams. Mm-hmm. And this napkin was signed as Ted Williams. The way he would sign a napkin that he runs into somebody in the restaurant and they say, gee, can I have your autograph? And he finds a paper napkin and he signs his name. That's kind of what one might see this as. And so what we have here, according to the oldest child, is that the two younger children took this piece of paper that he had signed simply as an autograph, this napkin, and they added their signatures to it. Then they put above his signature this statement that he wants to be preserved cryonically. who knows what to believe? I place some stock in the fact that the executor that was chosen for the estate, the executor himself, a man by the name of Cassidy, he wholeheartedly supported the younger children. You should also know, though, our viewers should also know, that the oldest child was not provided for in the will. There are only two beneficiaries in this will, and those are the two younger children, not the older. And remember, the older is much older. So now there's a statement, there's a reference to this oldest child, and it doesn't appear mean-spirited at all. We don't know that it tells. We just know that Ted Williams wrote that he's not providing for his oldest child because he has provided for her during her life. So maybe that's true. Maybe she received, in fact, more than the other kids. We just don't know this. But I suspect that might have fueled a little bit of the resentment that Bobby Joe and her husband, undertook, or that fueled, I think, all this litigation. And there was litigation. There were lawsuits, went on. Lots of money was spent. As a matter of fact, virtually all of Bobby Joe and her husband's money, whatever assets they had, were consumed in this litigation where they tried to undo these cryonics. And I don't know how you undo what the process you just described, where there's actually a sort of decapitation, that the head is preserved separately for reasons I don't understand. But anyway, there are reasons for it. To increase the probability that this will be successful someday. So I'm sure it consumed, incidentally, a significant number of assets, too. A trust has to be created so that you can assure the funding of this sort of project, because this project, for all we know, is a 100-year project.
Yeah.
So it's just fraught with uncertainty and scientific doubt, but nonetheless, it appears that was the plan, and yet Bobby Joe was very skeptical about this, and she and her husband were determined to try to get him buried. So, it would have meant that, I guess, he'd be unfrozen, and then I take that back, he would have been cremated. He would have been unfrozen, cremated, and then have his ashes spread over the Florida Keys, which is what he had said he wanted. So that was the objective in this litigation, and you have to wonder, what is the motivation for spending this kind of money? And to me, at least, it doesn't seem like something that I would be willing to spend my personal fortune to accomplish. So the motivations here are questionable. But one thing you find about family litigation, and I found this as a divorce lawyer, sometimes dollars and cents and tangible things just are put to the side because you can't justify some of the levels of conflict and exertion that's associated with family litigation. There's just something about it where it's fueled by something else, but you can't explain it in monetary terms.
Yeah, and I wonder, too, if, like you said, they were separate in, age and families and so on and so forth, and there might have just been, a big disconnect. And Bobby Joe, honestly, she might have just been upset that she wasn't included on the napkin or, in a lot of that family planning. And I can see how she may have been upset about not having any provisions in the will, but also she may have had a trust set up for her. We don't know that, or, because those are private. But I think I could see where she came from, just in terms of, he didn't want this, but also, like you said, they ran out of money at the end to even continue with litigation.
Yeah,
so,
you're right. And I think that's an interesting factor because there was a public campaign to raise money by this oldest daughter and her husband to raise money to help pay for this litigation because they announced they were broke. And I'll take them at their word that they didn't have the money to go on, which makes you wonder. One thing that I don't think I've mentioned yet is that $60 million is the approximate value of the estate. So $60 million means $30 million apiece to these two younger children. I think we can be pretty confident, based on what we've just said, that this oldest daughter did not have $30 million.
No.
So I think that she had reached a point where she didn't have the assets, whatever those might have been at one time. And you were right. There could have been a trust created for her. We just don't know. But I'm suspicious about that because of her inability to maintain this litigation, as well as her appeal to the public. Obviously, she believed in this fight, and she had spent a bunch of money on it already, and finally she couldn't put together, there wasn't enough of a public response to this, which I can imagine. It doesn't seem trademarks and other things that we've talked about that are so frequently a subject of for celebrities after their death. So I think that was at play too. But certainly his reputation, it made him look like he was kind of a strange character. Many people think that this is bizarre to do such a thing. And I think the family just thought that they didn't want this to be publicized any more than it had to be.
Yeah, and I think like on that point, they were a very private family. I think if he wanted to do that, he was going to do it in private. I mean, nobody knew about it. Nobody knew about it until she brought it forward for litigation. Nobody knew what happened to his body or anything. And I mean, in the end, she got some sort of money out of it. She got $650,000, which I mean, in 2002, it's a little bit, but yeah, that I don't know.
It makes you wonder, though, her willingness to accept that money. But
and she wanted to keep talking about it. I mean, she tried to talk to the press, her and her husband did, and she tried to get some of the other baseball players in the league behind them after all of it was said and done, and then they silenced her again. So I don't know if she just wanted to cause, like some drama because she was cut out of it or what, but it was really strange. And then, I mean, I feel like the pact was, legitimate just because his son died in 2007 and went on to have his body cryogenically kept in the same facility. And I don't know. It's just a whole lot. I don't know her reasons behind bringing it forward.
Yeah. And Bobby Joe and her husband did make the argument among many other arguments, that this was motivated by an effort to make money off of their dad, which I can't possibly see how this is a money-making strategy.
No.
In fact, it's going to consume money, assets that would otherwise be distributed to these two children. So I think that probably with Bobby Joe, and maybe this is a point for a transition for us to kind of wrap up and talk about what there is to learn here. But I think for Bobby Joe, this really was a number of things, and I suspect money was a piece of it, and that could be as much emotional as financial. Ultimately, the money is often regarded as a sort of indicator of love and affection from a parent. So money sometimes, becomes this surrogate measure of the extent to which one parent favored one child over another.
Yeah.
So I think that was it, but I also think it was distrust and dislike, probably, of these other two children for reasons we'll never fully know, but certainly there was a lot of animosity among them. But finally, this was put to bed. Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, I think maybe in her mind, too, she thought that if she went after her siblings and then, got all that said and done and won that, then she could go after Alcor, because that in and of itself is a big company. And if she sued them, she'd make quite a bit off of them, too.
Yeah, Alcor is, incidentally, it's the most well-known company that I know of that does this. I've seen a number of celebrities have used this same what do you call it? I guess you call it a for-profit company. I don't think it's not for profit. It says it's a foundation, but anyway, I think that may be the lesson we walk away with here. Whenever you decide that you're going to make a decision like this that is so controversial, maybe he couldn't have foreseen that it would be as controversial as it was, but it's best to do it formally. Now, I think the lessons here are a bit obvious, so forgive me if some of the points I make today might have occurred to you at the end of this story on your own, because that's the nature of some stories. Is there, say the bad decisions were so flagrant that a person on the street can say, yeah, I think you should have hired a lawyer, and that's one of the lessons here, is that Had this been properly executed, had there been parties who are not parties who are beneficiaries in the will, who are the witnesses, often you don't have witnesses that are beneficiaries in a will, period. But it also could have been done by way of having someone appointed through a durable power of attorney that specifically address decisions regarding disposition of the body. So then it's not so much an expression of a wish. Then you're just empowering someone to make that decision, whatever they choose to make. You've essentially given them that authority. So it's no longer relevant what Ted wanted. It's what the person chooses to do that is the person he appointed to make the decision. And that same authority would exist regarding decisions toward the end of life. Many of the people watching the show will have a durable power of attorney. The way the Missouri statute works is there needs to be specific mention about decisions made in the aftermath of someone's life. So if you're going to make decisions at that time about disposition of a body, then you need to have specific reference to it, specific authority. But this could have been handled so much better. And the good news is, though, that Ted he had a will. And he took the time to do estate planning. And if we ignore this subject, which normally is not the subject of dispute, normally this doesn't come up, then the other things worked. It worked. It was this one issue that threatened to derail all the estate planning that was done, because if you still end up in court with a lot of litigation, even though you've hammered out the disposition of the assets, if you use hundreds of thousands of dollars and time and agony and stress associated with it, then it undermines your estate plan. So looks like it was a good estate plan. I won't get into criticisms or questions I might raise about whether there was proper tax planning. It seems that if these assets went through the estate, the $60 million, as the probate documents suggest, then there was a chunk paid in taxes that probably could have been avoided with proper planning. Yeah. And perhaps he did have some planning, so maybe it's much less than it would have been. Maybe there's $100 million in assets, which it could very well be the case, because there was also a trustee appointed. I just don't know if that trustee was the trustee over a trust that was created in the will, which wouldn't have been of value to lower your taxes, or is it a trust that was created in 96 or before? So that's the reason we need to be careful in criticizing lawyers who do estate planning, where we see somebody who's died has taken a big hit in federal taxes, because it could be that it would have been much worse, and there's a trust out there that shielded a lot of assets. And this subject came up recently in a show we did not long ago. So that's our comments regarding Ted Williams. Anything else you would add?
I was just
Marlea?
thinking, with it was the same as Casey Kasem. I just think it's important that if you want something specifically done with your body after your death, I think it's important that you make sure that it's known. And this, I don't think any of our listeners are gonna be cryogenically embalmed or anything like that. But even just donating your body to science, I think it's important that your family knows your wishes on that stuff, because then you're kind of left with, your family's like, what do we do? Have they ever said anything what they wanted to be done? And then you're kind of left with kind of this same scenario. You probably don't have a napkin or anything like that. But yeah, that's why I picked this one. I think it's just something that's important to bring to light.
Yeah, and I'll just add that some Protestant denominations have the belief that if you're going to be resurrected, which they do believe in resurrection, that your body has to be intact.
Oh, yeah.
So these sects of these denominations of the Protestant faith, as well as other faiths, I'm sure, around the world, you would adamantly, vigorously, even violently oppose the idea of dismembering someone, either for science or for cryogenics. It's just a critical religious tenet that has to be addressed, or you'll have a ton of conflict with family members when someone dies. So some things can end up detonating probate litigation that you wouldn't expect. Yeah. That's another general walk away from this, and this topic is volatile and explosive to many people, especially depending on their religious views.
Yes, yeah, definitely.
So, all right, another interesting figure that you unearthed, so to speak, Ted Williams. And we look forward to returning to this topic as we discuss other lives and careers and estate planning. This has been another episode of Life's Third Act. Till next time, take care.
You've been listening to Life's Third Act, a podcast for thriving in retirement, sponsored by TuckerAllen, your estate and elder law advisors. Each week, we discuss topics and answer questions to help you better plan for your future. For more information, visit TuckerAllen.com. Subscribe and listen again next week for another edition of Life's Third Act. The choice of a lawyer is an important decision and should not be based solely on advertisements.